Hello, this is Just Business. This is the channel where you will learn what is business. And you probably heard the expression, it's just business, where, people usually use it in sort of a negative way. You get fired from a job and they say, well, it's not about, it's not about you. It's not about anything. It's just business. And it's one of those things that most people see as a negative. But what I want you to understand is what the term really means. A lot of the time, businesses fail, and because they don't realize that things are just business, and you have to almost take that very stoic or like non-emotional approach to business, because a lot of time we get emotionally involved and we want to do some things. We want to be nice. We want to be all these things, and in the process, we actually cause more damage than we actually do good. Businesses actually, when they are more just about business, they actually do more good than harm, and that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand. It's a lot of reason people get confused with capitalism. They think, oh, capitalism is evil, and that they really don't understand it. And I want to explain what just business really means. So, for example, let's take like the situation of firing an employee. Now, sometimes what happens in businesses is they have to fire employees. It's part of the things that businesses have to do, and it's not something that businesses like doing. To get an employee is actually a pretty expensive thing. You have to, generally you hire a recruiting company, you do a big process in order to get those employees. Then once you get that employee, you have to spend months training them on your processes, getting them to, work within your company, getting them, trained so that they actually become an effective employee. So there's a lot of cost associated with an employee. So firing an employee, not something that businesses want to do. And especially in small businesses, because sometimes what happens is not only do you do all that, which is an actual expense for the company, but you actually can have an emotional connection to that person. You feel bad for them. You say, well, they have a family, they have a kid, they have whatever. And you can actually have an emotional connection where you say, well, they're a friend. I don't really want to fire them. But if they're not performing, or they're not, or your company can't afford that employee, then what happens is by keeping them within your payroll, you're actually hurting your business. And that's a really hard thing to accept for most companies, that you have to sometimes fire people that you even like. And what you have to do is realize that it's just business. And so when doing that, the thing is to realize that if you don't fire that person, if you, get emotionally attached to them, or make an emotional decision rather than a business decision, then what can happen is they can weaken your company, and eventually your company will have these weak links that will basically take your company out of business. And the more you become emotional about decision making within your company, the more you are actually moving away from being a functional business to being a dysfunctional business, and you don't want to do that. So sometimes you have to make sort of it seems like a heartless decision, but ultimately, think of it this way: like firing that one person might save 10 other people's jobs. So the idea is this: that you want your business to be successful, because a successful business hires people, creates jobs, creates wealth, it creates opportunities for people, it creates products that people enjoy, it creates a whole bunch of things. And sometimes there's these hard choices that we have to make that seem, potentially immoral, because people think, well, it's unfair that you have to fire this person. This person has as I said, a family, they have responsibilities, they have a student loan that they need to pay, and you think, oh, it's really sad that this person's getting fired. It's really sad that you can't just give them the job. But when you think those ways, and that's where you kind of put this weird moral moral thing on it, what end up happening, you actually do something which is immoral, which is you give somebody a job that actually hurts other people's jobs or puts other people's jobs at risk. And that ultimately is a bad decision. So just business is sometimes like the most moral thing to do. And that's really what I want you to learn from this video, that what does just business mean? And that's just one example. But a lot of the time, what you have to realize is businesses have to make money. So that means that you have a product or service, and you have to make sure that your product or service is affordable, so people want to buy it, and that the cost to produce that product or service is less than what that affordable price is. And the difference between that affordable price and your costs is your margin. And your margin has to be big enough that it can support those costs in the future. And usually the kind of the rules of thumb within businesses is whatever your employee cost is, that employee cost to produce that product or service, you take that and you multiply it by 2. Sometimes 3, depends on your industry, but usually 2. And the reason being, that will give you enough of a margin that if the product doesn't sell, or if you can't, there's no demand for that service, that you've already made enough money from previously selling, or the few sales that you get, to cover those employee costs. And that's where you're just breaking even. Ultimately, you want to have it where you sell all your products, sell all your services. But generally, you want to have that margin which acts as a cushion and acts as a safety net for your business. Because there was actually a really interesting, I forget the philosopher that talked about it, but he was talking about how capitalism works. And he was basically saying that, if you look at Karl Marx, he'll say that employees are exploited. And the reason he said Marx was saying employees were exploited was, well, you pay them $1, and then you sell their labor, their efforts for $2. And so they're not getting paid what value that they brought. And what this other philosopher said, and I wish I could remember his name, but what he said was that the business is paying them $1, but that means that they've put out that money. And it's just like you getting a bank loan. When you go to the bank, you borrow money from the bank, and you might not pay them back. They're taking a risk with you when you borrow money from them. But you also are agreeing to pay them back eventually. Right? You pay, someday in the future, you're going to pay them back, or at least you're going to pay them in installments over many, many years. And the reason they charge you interest is to cover that time period. Well, the same works with businesses, that you're paying your employees to do their work, and really the time difference between when that work gets done, when the product gets created, and when it sells is what creates, the moral, case for the fact that you were getting paid more than what the employees' costs were. So the idea is that you're getting paid in the future, and that you might not get paid in the future, and you're taking that risk. So really, the reason businesses take risk is that they hope that in the future they can make a lot of money you know, selling those services or products that they create. And that's what the entrepreneur really is counting on, that they're going to create products or services that will be enjoyed in the future, and they will make money from those. A good example of where where a lot of these ideas kind of fall apart, and a way that Marxism actually falls apart, is what ends up happening is I talked about how there's this margin that you have between how much you pay your employees and how much the product sells for, and whatever that spread between them is your margin, right? Well, sometimes that margin changes. And a good example of this is the fidget spinner. A few years back, fidget spinners were the most popular toy out there. And they were selling for about $20 when they first came out, which is a lot of money for a little spinny thing that really isn't that entertaining. But they were really popular, and they sold incredibly well. So the cost to produce those things was about $1 to $2. Okay, and they were selling them for $20, so they were making pretty good margin. Now, there were a couple of things to understand within that margin, they were selling them to retail stores. So whenever you put things into retail, that means that the retailer sells it at $20, the business only gets $10, and so then really their profit is about $8 per fidget spinner. Sounds great. Still lots of money. They're 4x times whatever their costs were. That's pretty great. But fast forward a few months, like really only a few months later, the popularity of those fidget spinners created competition. So there was other companies that, hey, we can produce fidget spinners. We can produce them pretty cheaply. We'll produce them and we'll get into the market, and we'll have our own cool fidget spinners. We'll create ones with Spider-Man logos. We'll create ones with a whole bunch of fun things. They'll make them even better than the original fidget spinners. And those ones would all of a sudden sell. And so all of a sudden the price went from $20 to $10, then to $5, then to $2. At the end of the craze, fidget spinners were selling for anywhere for $1 or $2. They were just like, the price had just dropped so much. Now, if your cost was only $1 to make them or $2 to make them, all of a sudden you went from being profitable to producing something at a loss. And that's how risk works. And that's why you need these margins, and that's why you need to, be very careful when you kind of make that calculation of how much your costs are going to be, and how much you want to make or sell that product or service for. Because what always happens is when a successful product comes to market, there will be competition, and they will outprice you. And generally, what people don't realize about competition is if you want to be a billionaire, what you can do is do the Costco method. And the Costco method seems like, wow, this Costco makes millions and millions of dollars per year. It makes it's $1 billion, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And the way that they can do that is they're not gouging. Their margins are actually very small. Their margins are 2%. 2%, that's it. So it's not like they're gouging people and making lots of money by gouging people. It's not like they're paying their suppliers very little. It's that they know that if they can sell a lot of product, then even at 2%, if you sell a lot, it adds up to being a big win at the end. And that's how companies think. They try to get, with competition, it's it becomes like a razor's edge between the cost to produce those items and the actual sale of those items, like how much the price is of those items. And that's what happens with business. And as competition really comes into the market, constantly there's that, struggle between, the cost to produce and that cost which you sell it at. And really, that's how business works. That's why, you know, you never want to regulate that. If you want to get the cost, like let's say you have something which, like let's say fidget spinners, back to the fidget spinners example. The fidget spinners could save lives somehow. I don't know. The magic of fidget spinners were saving lives. And people are saying, well, I can't afford $20 for a fidget spinner. The government should come in and regulate that and make fidget spinners only like $10. Okay? And they could do that. Okay? The government could come in, say the cost of fidget spinners has to be $10. We are mandating it. That's what it is. Well, what it would end up happening is less businesses would come into the market because the amount of money that a product can generate creates interest. It's just like anyone else. Like, if you know that you have something that's worth lots and lots of money, you're going to be more keen to sell it. Okay, so if you know that you can sell your fidget spinners for $20, then you're going to be much more excited than hearing that they're only worth $10. So less businesses will come in, and when less businesses come in, you don't get that correction in price. It's slower to correct. And generally what ends up happening is the price actually doesn't, like it stays at $10, but the quality goes down. And everything that you want the fidget spinner to do actually gets worse. Just like in my previous example, I was talking about how fidget spinners, not only did the price come down, but the quality went up. The quality and the coolness factor, all of those things got added to them because people were wanting to sell as many fidget spinners as possible, and they were trying to like make them cool. They were trying to make them like make cool sounds and do different fun things, light up, things that would make their fidget spinners stand out above the others and get as much money out of the market as possible. Well, if you regulate that, all of a sudden the people that are willing to take the risk are pushed out, and you have like sort of a very stagnant market. So generally, price controls are one of the worst things you can do. It generally keeps the price high and it keeps the quality low. And it's one of those things that people don't understand, but it is just business. So thanks for everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you understand what is just business. Bye for now.